The warning was issued in 1997 by the United States federal government, 7 scientists, 1 official report, Open File Report 97-89, United States Geological Survey. And for 28 years, the state of Oregon has done almost nothing about it. No sirens, no evacuation routes, no public disclosure at the lodges built on the debris, no warning system for the 200,000 people living downstream. Just a document, sitting in a federal archive, while 12 glaciers load up above a steaming volcanic dome, and a die sits on the table with a 1 in 15 chance of landing the wrong way every 30 years. This is not a prediction. This is not a theory. This is a warning that has already been issued. It was issued before most of the people in the death zone moved there, and almost none of them have ever heard of it. Let me read you the sentence that changed how geologists talk about Mount Hood. It is on page 3 of Open File Report 97-89. The probability of eruption-generated lahars affecting the Sandy and White River valleys is 1 in 15 to 1 in 30 during the next 30 years. That report was published in 1997. That 30-year window expires in 2027, 12 months from now. And the probability has not gone down. The mountain has not cooled. The glaciers have not shrunk enough to reduce the threat. The dome is still steaming. The clock is still running. But here is the detail that tells the real story. Most people hear of volcanic threat and picture lava. Orange rivers of molten rock moving slowly down a hillside. The kind you can walk away from. Mount Hood will not send lava. Mount Hood will send something far worse. A lahar. Say it out loud. Lahar. Because Indonesia is where the world first learned what they do. A lahar is a river of wet concrete, volcanic ash, pulverized rock, melted glacier ice, ripped up forest, combined into a slurry so dense it carries boulders the size of houses, moving at 35 to 50 miles per hour, down narrow river valleys, with no warning sound until it is already rounding the bend above you. Then it sounds like a freight train. You have seconds, not minutes. Seconds. And Mount Hood is sitting above 40 miles of populated river valley right now, loaded, waiting. The official warning issued. The sirens never built. Here is what is sitting at the top of that mountain tonight. At 11,249 feet, Mount Hood carries 12 named glaciers: Palmer, Reed, Zigzag, Sandy, White River, Elliott, Co. A crown of compressed ice sitting directly above the river valleys below. And just beneath the summit, at 9,800 feet, sits Crater Rock. Not a geological curiosity, not a tourist landmark, a solidified lava dome, a plug of magma that forced itself to the surface between 1781 and 1793 during what geologists call the Old Maid Eruption, the most recent eruption in Oregon's recorded history. And it is still warm. The fumaroles venting at Crater Rock's surface measure 89 degrees Celsius. That is 4 degrees below boiling water. The gas escaping through the cracks has been analyzed by geothermometer. It registers above 300 degrees Celsius. That is a magmatic signature. That is the temperature of rock with active heat still moving beneath it. Mount Hood is not extinct. Mount Hood is not dormant. Mount Hood is breathing, and it is rotting from the inside. Hydrothermal alteration. For 2 centuries, the volcanic system's acidic fluids have been chemically dissolving the summit rock from within, eating through the dacite, converting solid rock into unstable clay minerals. Altered rock is roughly 10 times weaker than fresh rock. The upper flanks of Mount Hood are a weakened shell, holding billions of gallons of meltwater above 200,000 people. Dr. Allison Colsar at Oregon State University described what the next eruption will most likely look like. She said lava will ooze up and form what she called a blister of lava at the top of the volcano. Her exact word, blister. A blister at 9,800 feet, on a weakened acid-cooked rock face, above 12 loaded glaciers, above the Sandy River, above Gresham, above Troutdale, above the pipelines carrying drinking water to 1 million people. When that blister bursts, the sequence is not complicated. Pyroclastic flows race down the flanks. They cross the glaciers in seconds. They flash melt the ice. And within 10 minutes, a wall of volcanic concrete is moving down the Zigzag River at freeway speed. 10 minutes. Within 30 minutes, it reaches government camp. Population, part of a combined mountain community of nearly 13,000 people. No Lahar sirens in government camp. Within 30 minutes, it reaches rhododendron. No Lahar sirens in rhododendron. Within 90 minutes, the flow reaches Troutdale at the Columbia River. Population, 16,500. Built on a flat river delta at the mouth of the Sandy. That delta is not a river deposit, that is a Lahar deposit. From the last eruption. The town of Troutdale is literally built on the geological receipt from 1793, and there are no Lahar sirens in Troutdale either. Now let me tell you about the people downstream who still don't know they are downstream. The geographic ladder below Mount Hood reads like a roll call. Government Camp, Zigzag, Wildwood, Brightwood, Sandy. Combined population, nearly 13,000. Gresham, Oregon. Population, 116,000. Oregon's fourth largest city, sitting in the Sandy River corridor, Troutdale. Population, 16,500. Built on the Lahar Delta. The full Sandy, Zigzag, and Lower Columbia corridor. Counting eastern Gresham, counting the Interstate 84 interchange, counting the Union Pacific Main Line, counting the Bull Run pipeline crossings. 200,000 Oregonians, inside the downstream threat zone, identified in official state and federal geological studies, living there, most of them unaware. All of them unprotected by any dedicated warning system. Here is where it gets worse. Portland's primary drinking water comes from the Bull Run watershed. 1 million people, 1 in 4 Oregonians. The watershed itself sits behind a protective ridge. But the pipelines that move that water into Portland cross the Sandy River Valley directly. A Lahar that reaches the Sandy River mouth severs those pipelines the same afternoon it destroys Troutdale. 1 million people lose drinking water before dinner, on the same day, from the same event. And Interstate 84 runs along the south bank of the Columbia River through the same corridor. The primary east-west highway artery connecting Portland to the rest of Oregon. Gone. The Union Pacific Main Line runs beside it. Gone. Bonneville Dam sits 25 miles downstream, the largest hydroelectric dam in the Pacific Northwest, in the path of a debris flood from upstream. Dogami has mapped exactly what is in the hazard zone: 47,000 buildings, 104 schools and emergency response facilities, 2,600 miles of road, 340 bridges, 944 electric transmission towers, 615 miles of transmission lines, all of it inventoried, none of it protected by a system designed specifically for Lahar warning. Here is what makes that unconscionable. In 1980, there was no eruption at Mount Hood, no volcanic event, just rain. A single intense rainstorm on Christmas Day melted snow rapidly on the upper east flank. It triggered a small landslide in loose volcanic sediment on Palali Creek. The resulting Lahar moved down valley at 25 to 35 miles per hour. At the mouth of Palali Creek, it spread out, killed one person, and temporarily dammed the East Fork Hood River. When that temporary dam failed, the flooding destroyed 5 miles of highway, 3 bridges, a state park, minimum $13 million in damage, from rain, from one afternoon of heavy rainfall on loose volcanic material. Not an eruption, not a dome collapse, not a pyroclastic flow across 12 glaciers, just rain. That was a drizzle compared to what Open File Report 9789 describes, and it still killed someone and wiped out 5 miles of highway. Now imagine what the modeled event looks like, and now the part of this story that history already tried to tell us. On November 3, 1805, William Clark stood at the mouth of an unnamed river on the south bank of the Columbia. He tried to wade across it. He could not. He wrote in his journal that the bottom was quicksand, impassable. The expedition named it the Quicksand River. 5 months later, Sergeant Nathaniel Pryor went upstream. He reported the bed was formed entirely of quicksand. A pole could be driven 6 to 8 feet into the riverbed with no solid bottom. Here is what they did not know. The Old Maid eruption had ended 10 to 20 years before they arrived. Tree ring dating confirms the eruption between 1781 and 1793. The core of discovery was standing in the freshest Lahar deposit in North American recorded history. The quicksand was not sand. It was fluidized volcanic ash, pulverized dacite, still flushing down to the Columbia 2 decades after the eruption. Oregonians later renamed the Quicksand River. They called it the Sandy, and built Troutdale on its mouth, and Gresham on its banks, and forgot what the name used to mean. When Lewis and Clark wrote quicksand, they were writing a warning. It lasted 220 years, and nobody read it. Here is the question nobody in Salem is answering. Mount St. Helens erupted on May 18, 1980. 57 people died. The Lahar from St. Helens traveled 50 miles down the Toutle River Valley in under 8 hours. It buried bridges. It choked the Columbia shipping channel with sediment for months. It caused over $1 billion in damage in 1980 dollars. And Mount St. Helens sits farther from a major metropolitan area than Mount Hood does. Portland is 50 miles from Mount Hood's summit. The Sandy River mouth is 40 miles from Crater Rock. The drive from Timberline Lodge to downtown Portland takes 1 hour on a clear day. The modeled Lahar reaches the Sandy-Columbia confluence in 90 minutes. The difference between evacuation and entombment is 30 minutes. Without a single dedicated siren. Without a single tested evacuation protocol. Without a single public-facing disclosure requirement on the lodges and campgrounds built inside the hazard zone. Which brings us back to 1997. Open File Report 97-89. The warning the federal government already issued. 7 scientists signed it. The USGS published it. Oregon's own Department of Geology and Mineral Industries built on it with their own multi-hazard study. Counting every building. Counting every bridge. Counting every school. Counting every transmission tower in the path. The data exists. The maps exist. The probability exists. 1 in 15. That is not a ghost story. That is a federal geological risk assessment. And the 30-year window on that assessment expires in 2027. So here is where we stand tonight. Crater Rock is still steaming at 89 degrees Celsius. 12 glaciers are still loaded above it. The Sandy River is still running brown through Troutdale every spring melt, carrying grain by grain the last of the old maid eruption down to the Columbia. 116,000 people in Gresham are going to sleep tonight inside a documented Lahar corridor. 16,500 people in Troutdale are waking up tomorrow on a Lahar delta. 1 million people in Portland are drinking water through pipelines crossing a Lahar path. And a federal warning issued in 1997 is still sitting in an archive. Technically on record. Practically invisible. The death zone was mapped. The warning was issued. The sirens were never built. The die is still on the table. And every year that passes without a warning system is another year that Oregon is betting the one will not come up. So far, they have been right. So far. The Sandy River is still running brown. Lewis and Clark already told us why. They just called it the quicksand, and nobody listened then either.